Hi everyone, it's Steph and welcome to another video. So as you saw in the intro, I've spun up a whole heap of yarn from my stash. I'm doing some sampling today for a larger project, and I just want to make sure that the pattern, the yarn and the set that I've chosen all work together for what I'm looking for. I've just finished washing 200 grams of each of these three colours. So one is a deep blue, another is a beige, and the other one is a cream colour. So now that they have been washed and dried, I'm going to ball up just 100 grams of each of the colours just to see how much I'm going to need for the sampling. The other skeins I'll put to the side and add to what I'm going to have to spin up for the larger project I've got in mind. In my stash, I'd also found a couple of skeins of multicoloured yarn that I'd spun up and not used from last year. So I'm going to add these into the project as well, as I feel like the colours will all look really good together. This multicoloured yarn that I found in my stash are all colours that my son had actually chosen. So that's why also I'm going to pop them in the project. I don't have a lot of it, so I'll also have to think very carefully about how I use it in the project so that I get consistency throughout the fabric. I'm going to be using the blue yarn just for the weft, and then the cream colour, the beige and the multicolour yarn I'm going to put in the warp. So warping was super easy, just using the width of my dining table and also my 40cm samplet loom from Ashford. I need to know how everything looks and also get an idea of what the fabric feels like and if I need to make any adjustments in the pattern or in the yarn or in my set. This is a sample for a larger project, but I also have an idea of what I'm going to use the resulting fabric from the sample for. I want to make a flat cap for my stepfather. Unusually for me, I just warped up with the cream colour first, just doing every third slot. Then I've gone through with the beige and done the same thing every third slot. And then I've gone through with the multicolour yarn in the remaining slots. So super easy, super quick warp up, which took me 10 to 15 minutes, not long at all. After I'd finished warping up, I just did a quick check to make sure I hadn't missed any slots, because I had done one colour at a time, and then I wound on using brown paper as a separator just towards the pegs. I then threaded it up just by simply moving one thread from the slot into the hole to the right, lashed on and spread my warp with some scrap yarn, and I was ready to weave. So I'm just using the blue as the weft, and so far I'm actually really liking it. I like this middle bit, and I think I'm going to have to spread out the stripes a little bit more though, because they're a little bit too stark, which is not really what I wanted. But I'm loving the feel of the fabric. The set is fine. I'm using a 7.5 dent reed. You can also use an 8 dent, of course, for this, so it's making a relatively dense fabric, which is what I want for my larger project. Weaving was really easy and quick. As always, it's the favourite part of any project for me, is the actual weave part. But yeah, really liking it. As I'm weaving, I'm also thinking about how I can do this differently so that the stripes aren't quite so stark. And I'm going to do that on my next sample. So now that I've finished, I secure the weaving with some scrap yarn. I snipped it off, tied the edges together, and here's what it looks like. It looks really lovely. So on to the second sample. I went ahead and warped up exactly the same as I did for the first sample. just one colour in every third slot, which again was super easy and super quick. Once that was done, I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted to thread up. So instead of just putting one colour from one slot into the corresponding hole on the right, I'm mixing it up. So by mixing it up, there's a different colour in each slot and each hole. And whilst you still get the stripes, they won't be quite as stark and they'll be a lot more diffused, so that you can see here that the stripes are still there but not quite as visible. Once that was all threaded up, I lashed on like I did before, spread my warp with scrap yarn, and then just wove again using the blue yarn as the weft. And I'm really loving how this looks. The stripes are still there, but they're not really visible. It's more of a subtle stripe in the yarn, and you could also see where the multicolour yarn is making more defined and then more diffused stripes as well, which I really like. In the last third of this sample, I also tried a different pattern where instead of just using the blue as the weft, I actually alternated 2 blues with 1 cream and then 2 blues and 1 beige. And that really gave this pretty pattern that I think is most likely the one I'm going to go with for my larger project, depending on whether I have enough yarn. So here is a little bit of a closer look at that last pattern in the last third of this sample, and also the diffused stripes in a bit of a close-up. Once they were off the loom, I washed them in warm to hot water with some wool wash and gently agitated it, not too much, and then gave them a good rinse and then laid them out flat to dry. Once the fabric was dry, I gave it a good iron, and then it was time to sit down and work out how to turn this fabric into a flat cap. So this is the pattern that I'll be using today, and it's the top one here that I'm going to be making. I don't often use patterns, but I'm guessing that I can muddle through it. Famous last words. I've got these 2 100% cotton remnants and also these 2 100% cotton fabrics for the lining. I also have iron-on interfacing, which I'm going to be using, and also this plastic canvas, which goes in the actual visor part. I wasn't sure what thickness to get, so I got 2 different ones. I chose to use iron-on interfacing for both entire samples, which was my first mistake because not all of the pattern calls for interfacing, which I didn't realise until the end. So step 1, read the pattern. The reasons I used the interfacing for the entire pieces was that I thought it would be easier to cut everything out and the edges wouldn't fray as much. But anywho, once the interfacing was all ironed on and done, I was ready to lay out the patterns and figure out where I was going to put each piece. There are only 3 pieces to this pattern, and I'm just cutting singles of these 2 larger pieces, and then I've got to cut out 2 or double of the smaller piece. So I tried to work out where I was going to put everything to make sure that it kind of made sense with the stripes and how it was going to look on the finished piece. Once I'd worked out where everything was going to go, I then heavily pinned each piece into place. The fabric is quite thick, so I did have to use a lot of pins. I tried to use scissors to cut it out, but my gammy thumb just wasn't playing well with it, so I had to use a rotary cutter to cut everything out. This brings me to mistake number 2. Once everything was cut out, I should have gone straight to the sewing machine and zigzagged all of the edges, because even with the interfacing, some of the edges started to unravel almost straight away. So note to self for future projects, zigzag all of the edges before doing anything else. I think this happened because it was actually really thick fabric and using wool, because it hasn't happened to me using cotton before, and because the fabric was quite thick and the wool, not all of the wool was actually sticking to the interfacing, so that's why I think it happened. I used the thinner choice of the plastic canvas for the visor part, and that seemed to work out really well. So now I'm just looking at the pattern and seeing how I need to get started and put things together. The first step is sewing together these little fingers, just one after the other, and that creates the back part of the hat. Then I'll turn it to the other side and then top stitch where I've stitched. Once those little fingers were sewn and I turned it around the other side and top stitched around where I'd sewn, it was time to add the front and sides to this panel. So this is all one piece, like a big U shape. So I realised almost immediately that this was going to be quite tricky to do, but I did manage to get it on in the end. Now I'm just turning the piece inside out and just pressing out all of those edges, and now you can kind of see the shape that's coming along, and I'm actually thinking this looks amazing at this stage. I then just went around and did a little bit of stay stitching just to keep everything together and looking neat along the edges. You can see here some of the edges along the bottom have started to fray. I have stopped that with stay stitching, so that should stay intact. So now it's time to cut out and do the lining. So that's just these two pieces, the big hand-like thing with the fingers and the big U shape. And I've used the blue quilting cotton for this. So once that's done and cut out, I sewed it all together and then popped it in on the inside of the hat and then sewed all the way around the outside to secure the lining to the main piece. Once the lining was done, it's time to do the visor. So I just put the big two smiley pieces together and then sewed around the very bottom, leaving the top part free. Then I popped the plastic canvas into the visor part and then had to pin it to the cap. This was the most trickiest bit, and it was really fiddly to try and get it to sit right and sit where it needed to sit and look good. This is where some of the fraying started on the visor part as well, because I didn't catch all of it when I did the sewing. The last part of the pattern is using the grosgrain ribbon to go around the edges. I didn't have any grosgrain ribbon, so I had to go and do an emergency trip to Spotlight, but I did work it out and how to actually set that in by sewing it to the outside, folding it onto the inside and then top stitching around the edge, which is what I've done. And yeah, it's not bad for a first attempt, but definitely need to do this again with a different kind of fabric. So, final thoughts. I think where I went wrong to start with is the fabric is too thick. It definitely isn't good enough to give away as a gift. The visor part is also too chunky, and that's because the actual fabric is too thick, plus I've interlined it as well, and I shouldn't have. On the inside of the visor, you can see where I've failed to pick up the edges and my stitching, and it's not going to take very long for that to fall apart. If I had enough fabric, I could redo it, but I think at the end of the day it's just not the right fabric for the job. So I'm going to chalk that up to experience and definitely going to redo it again in the future with a different fabric. Thank you so much for watching and for supporting my channel. I've shared this even though it's not a perfect completed piece, because I think it's important to share things when they don't go the way you want them to, as well as things that are perfect, because the creative process doesn't always go the way that we want to. But thank you anyway. Please like if you found this video useful. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.